Coming up on this episode of Greyhound Nation, John gets a sneak peek at Charlie Blanning's latest Greyhound history project. Stay tuned for the announcement. The Nation is next, and we've got the exclusive. This is Greyhound Nation, episode 26, recorded December 16th, 2021. Charlie Blanning's latest Greyhound history project. Greyhound Nation is a podcast for Greyhound enthusiasts produced by Greyhound enthusiasts. To learn more about our show and its hosts, visit our website at greyhoundnation.dog. That's greyhoundnation.dog. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Greyhound Nation podcast. I'm Michael Burns, and now here's your host, John Parker.
Welcome back, everybody. We have a frequent guest with us today in Charlie Blanning. Charlie, we have him often because I like to say he's forgotten more about greyhounds and greyhound history than I and most people will ever know. So, Charlie, welcome.
Thank you, John. Good
and Charlie has given us an exclusive today here on Greyhound Nation. He's got an exciting and new announcement to make. And so, Charlie, without further ado, tell us what you got.
Well, I'm about to start work on a new book, which will be called 22 Waterloo Cups, 1981 to 2005, which will trace the history of the Waterloo Cup, which I would consider to be the greatest test that there ever has been for a greyhound, up until the time the sport was banned in England and Wales, and which put an end to this great event.
That's great. That's going to be another great book. Tell us how this came about.
Well, what happened was that what one needs to know is that in the 1920s, there was a book published called 56 Waterloo Cups. And it was written by a man called Lowy Hall. Lowy Hall was a great greyhound personality of the time. He was a journalist. He wrote for a weekly newspaper called The Sportsman, covering all the coursing meetings at that time in England under the pen name of Vindex. And also, on top of that, he was a breeder of greyhounds, a manager of a huge kennel which belonged to the Duke of Leeds. He was the secretary of one of the major coursing meetings of the day. He was a man who was steeped in greyhounds. And since he was a little boy, he had been taken to the Waterloo Cup. And this book, 56 Waterloo Cups, is a record of his attendance at the Waterloo Cup and what happened. And the great thing about him was that he just didn't simply record what happened in terms of which dog beat this and what actually happened in a course. He also tells lots of entertaining anecdotes about the famous greyhounds which have gone down in history, which gives it a real sort of personal touch. And that book was published in 1922. And what happened much, much later in the 1970s was that another very famous greyhound writer called Herbert Edwards Clark tried to write a book about the Waterloo Cup, which took up where Lowy Hall left off. So he then traced the Waterloo Cup from 1923, I think it probably was, up until the last Waterloo Cup, which he saw, which was in 1977. The first few Waterloo Cups he hadn't actually attended in person, but he had seen, I think, all of them since 1928. So there again, he was an eyewitness, and he told the story of each year, of each great success of that particular time. And very sad, really, because I knew H. Edwards Clark quite well because he was a friend of my father and had been for many years. And sadly, in that year, when he was finishing his Waterloo Cup book, he contracted liver cancer, and really very quickly he died. And so the book was published posthumously. A friend of mine called Tom Gibson got all his papers together, found a publisher, and the book was duly published. There are quite a few copies of it about. It's not difficult to find. Anyway, what then happens is that, of course, in 1977, the Waterloo Cup fell into abeyance for a brief period. This was mainly because Lord Sefton, on whose land the Waterloo Cup was held, had died in 1972, and the estate, as far as coursing was concerned, had been somewhat neglected. The meeting wasn't what it was, and for 4 years, a very determined committee put matters to right at Altcar, where the Waterloo Cup was run, encouraged by the new owner of the estate, who was called Lord Leverhulme. And in 1981, they were able to revive the Waterloo Cup, and it then proceeded successfully until eventually the English Parliament banned the sport in 2005. And I have an Irish friend called John Fitzgerald, who's a very talented painter of coursing scenes. And he sent me a message when I published Please Mister, my account of the early days of track racing. And he said, look, Lowy Hall wrote his book, Edwards Clark wrote his. Why don't you pick up the baton and write the final years of the Waterloo Cup, and then the history will be complete? And I was intrigued by this idea. So I went to the National Coursing Club and said, would they be interested in assisting the project, whether they would be perhaps able to underwrite the cost of the publication. And they were extremely interested. And I'm delighted to say, therefore, that all I've got to do now is sit down and write it.
Well, you'll turn out prodigiously, I'm sure, as you're always able to. That you're able to, you write your weekly column for the Sporting News, or is it a monthly? I can't remember.
It's a monthly for the Sporting.
And yes. you produce great columns there, so I have no doubt that you'll be able to fill the pages of this one. What's the timeline?
Well, what we would hope to do, of course, is to have the book out next autumn, in late October, or perhaps in November. Always a good time to publish books, of course, because, as you know, the world and his wife knows, more books are sold between September and Christmas than at any other time during the year. So we would be hopeful that we can probably get the book out by the autumn, and hopefully catch some of those Christmas sales. Yes.
And do you, of course, you're going to be your biggest source material because you were there for all of them. What other source materials will you be using?
Well, just out of camera shot, I have a vast pile of scrapbooks, which have been very kindly loaned to me by Sir Mark Prescott, the famous Newmarket racehorse trainer, because during those years, from 1977 up until 2005, Sir Mark was leading the charge with the Waterloo Cup Committee to get the great event up and running again. And he was a meticulous keeper of scrapbooks, of press cuttings and photographs and so on and so forth. So as I said to him only the other day, I said, I think the scrapbooks are going to write the book for me. So between personal knowledge, if you like, and the backup of Sir Mark's archive, I think we're going to be able to produce a really good book.
And what will be the kind of the look and feel of the book in terms of compared to the Greyhound and the Hare, your opus magnum, and then the Please Mister?
Well, I'm being very fortunate in as far as that my friend Jeff Hayes, who designed both those books, and they're beautiful books, I think. Jeff has agreed to do the book design again. So what we intend to do is the Waterloo Cup book will be, if you like, uniform with those two volumes. So it'll be a big page format book about 250 pages, plenty of photographs and illustrations, and I hope also plenty of good stories and anecdotes. I don't want a book which is simply so and so beat so and so, so and so beat so and so. What I want to try and recall is the color and the life and the excitement of what was a truly wonderful event.
Yeah, those last years especially had to have particular meaning for you as things wound down to 2005 and the hard stop that it took at that time because of the ban on coursing and fox hunting in England. Reflect on that a little bit and how that's going to shape your writing of the book.
Well, right from the very start, of course, right from 1981, the meeting was plagued by the attentions of the organization known as the Hunt Saboteurs, who were trying to get fox hunting banned at the same time as also they were trying to get coursing banned. And the Hunt Saboteurs were not the sort of people who just turned up and waved a few banners. I mean, they had means of intervening frequently violently in the meeting in an attempt to stop it. Obviously, of course, the organizers of the Waterloo Cup themselves took steps to make sure that the antis, as we always called them, the Hunt Saboteurs and their acolyte organizations, failed to stop the meeting taking place, which I am glad to say they always did. But it it led to some fairly lively times and some pretty lively clashes between the two sides.
Well, you've been nice enough to share. You've already got the foreword done in the form of Sir Mark Prescott. It may well be the longest book foreword ever written. You should submit it to the Guinness Book of World Records. But you've graciously given me a sneak peek, advanced look at it, and it's wonderful. And I can only imagine the kind of stories that from those reflected in Sir Mark's foreword that you'll come up with.
Well, Sir Mark was very kind to write this forward for me, and as you know, there are some marvelous stories in it. Yes, it was, as I say, they were lively times. But somehow the Waterloo Cup carried through, and it took the intervention of the British Parliament to put a stop to the meeting. It wasn't the antis who stopped it.
Yeah, yeah. It's going to be of particular interest to me because I had the good fortune to get in on 7 Waterloo Cups before it came to an end, starting in 1998, and it was truly a kind of a Greyhound life experience changer for me, in the sense that I saw a whole new aspect of Greyhounds and the history of the breed, and just I just had a marvelous time every time I came over. The beauty of the countryside, the great British sporting culture, all the nice people that I met and have made lifelong friends with. It was a marvelous experience. I really count myself lucky that I was able to get over there, and that I got over there before the ban came along. I feel badly for people that never got to see it, because really it's you had to see, if you want to have your Greyhound CV complete, you had to have seen the Waterloo Cup.
And it doesn't matter how many videos and films that you might see of the Waterloo Cup, as you would know, John. I mean, you can't appreciate just how exciting an occasion it was unless you were there. It's like any great sporting occasion. You can watch it on the television, but it's nothing as good as actually being there. And the great thing about the Waterloo Cup was that it was run on running grounds, on fields which were exactly the same as they had been using back in the 1890s when great greyhounds like Fullerton were running. So there we were. The greyhounds might have changed, but everything else was the same. I mean, you really could imagine that these wonderful, wonderful dogs that you only see in the distant pedigrees of the dogs that you own yourselves, it was still the same. I mean, the dog that they could have been leading out onto the withens to be slipped in the final, it could have been Master McGrath, it could have been Fullerton. And you were there, just in the same way as the people who saw Master McGrath win and Fullerton win. You were there. So in a way, it's like visiting, say, an old battlefield, but the war's still going on. You know, you're there as a spectator. It's like being in a time machine, but suddenly the years have been rolled back 100 years, and there you are. You're seeing it as people did in history. I think that's a fantastic experience.
Yeah, that's what captured me about it, was once we kind of settled in and were watching, and I had done a little reading on the history of it, of the Waterloo Cup and some of the great greyhounds of history, and I thought, man, I'm looking out over a field that Fullerton ran on, for goodness sakes, and you'd love to have a time machine to go back to that, but we got pretty close to that, and I dare say that the sporting culture had not changed a great deal. That's what I was taken by, was everybody was so friendly and just glad to be there, and just caught up in the day and what the historical aspects of the Waterloo Cup were.
No, it was a marvelous, marvelous occasion. So sad that it's gone.
We we wanted to bring back a little piece of the Withens with us, and I think it was on our first trip. We had a few days after the last day of the Waterloo Cup, so I was over there with my friends Pam and Glenn Davis, and we went back to the Withens the day after, and it was blowing a gale, bitterly cold, and we had bought a small jar at some gift shop, and we went out there and scooped up some dirt from the field and put it in there and kind of smuggled it back to the U.S. We didn't declare it as an agricultural product. I can confess now. I think the statute of limitation is run on that. But and so we brought this dirt back, and every year at our lure trial, which we call the Fullerton Cup, which we run every November, Glenn Davis, we would ceremoniously go out and cast a bit of the Withens out on the lure coursing field, and with the hope that all the greyhounds that day would run like Fullerton did over that dirt. So that was always something fun we did for a long time.
Yes. I assume there's not much left.
No, there's very little. And, it was that peat, that wonderful soft peat soil, and it's kind of dried up now and crumbly. But we're not going to use all of it. I'm going to keep some of it for forever. I can remember at the last Waterloo Cup in 2005 that I saw people picking up grass and taking it home with them and so forth to have as a keepsake.
Yeah. Well, the field is still there, of course, because the remarkable thing about it was this land, which is just north of Liverpool and near to the coast, is the most marvelous agricultural land. It's land which has been basically reclaimed from the sea. So it's all, as you said yourself, it's mainly peat, and it will just about grow anything. But even so, despite that, those two great fields at Withens and Lydiate, which were used for the Waterloo Cup, were kept down to permanent grass and grazed by cattle or by sheep, rather than, for instance, for growing, productive crops from which, a good profit could be made by the farmers. They were kept specially for the coursing. And the only time that they were ever ploughed were during the First and Second World Wars, when, of course, England was very short of food, and even the Withens and the Lydiate were ploughed to produce the crop. But the rest of the time, they were always kept down to grass, even though it was made a loss as far as the farming was concerned. That was just so that it was kept for the coursing, and also, of course, to provide the most marvelous going for the greyhounds.
And it was beautifully green, even in the wintertime. We're used here in the southern United States to the grass goes dormant and turns a little bit to a kind of a tannish brown. And when we first went over there, and I said, "Why is all this grass so green right in the middle of the winter?" And it was just a beautiful uh, a place to see the running, and the footing was just fantastic.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. And of course, I have to tell you, as we warned them, the fields are no longer like that. The Withens and Lydiate have been ploughed for crops since, and also friends who message me about Altcar say that there's barely a hair. There's not a hair left on the place.
Yeah, yeah.
We told them,
Exactly. It was a fact completely lost on the Antes that they weren't doing anything that was of benefit or a favor to the heirs, and they knew it already because, as I've discussed with you and Sir Mark Prescott, when Lord Sefton died and the tenant farmers stopped being paid for hair damage to their crops, they had no incentive to do anything but kill them
yeah,
because they weren't being paid for the damage that the hares were doing to the crops, so they just wiped them out because they didn't want the damage to the crops, and that's what hares do. So it was an amazing thing that Lord Leverhulme bought the estate and came back in and began paying the tenant farmers not to kill the hares. The Antes knew that, and they knew what hare preservation and coursing, the link between those two, and yet they proceeded anyway.
yes, they did. I once was part of a delegation that met the Minister of the Environment at the time. He was a Labour minister, and to discuss field sports and the attempt to abolish them and so on and so forth. And I said to him, I said, look, after we're gone, what are you going to do to protect the hare? And there was just silence. He had no slightest idea, of course. And as we warned them, as soon as the Waterloo Cup was over, and this was exactly the same on other estates and farms where hare coursing had taken place previously, the hares, if the hares weren't poached, then the hares were shot by the farmers and the keepers. You won't find one at Altcar today.
It's such a shame, and
Yeah,
but the good news is you're going to chronicle it and preserve it for history, as you've done with the other two books, and that's going to be a marvelous experience for everybody to read about. Uh, and I would urge, as I understand it, there's only going to be 500 copies printed. Is that correct?
that's absolutely correct. Yes.
So,
So
folks,
it's
once they
a
start
limited.
selling, you better get them. How will they be sold, Charlie?
We're going to sell them in exactly the same way as we've been selling Please Mr. Golden Age of Greyhound Racing. It'll be handled by the Fullerton Press, which is run by myself and my wife, and we'll be dealing with all the dispatch. So people who are used to buying Please Mr. And I'm sure they found the the dispatch when they bought a book very, very speedy wherever they live in the world. That will be just the same for the Waterloo Cup. Sheila and I will be handling everything.
And will you be offering the signature? I can't remember what those things are called, where you put them at the front of the book, where you can get a signed copy from the author.
You'll be able to get a signed copy. Yes, yes, yes. The author's always willing to sign a copy.
Now we know that we've discussed this before, but the Greyhound and the Hare is completely sold out, and not many are making their appearance in the secondary market that I've seen. But there are still a few copies left of Please Mister, as I understand it. Tell us about
Yes,
that.
yes, there are. I'm afraid the Greyhound and the Hare, and people write to us frequently and say, can I get a copy? And my answer has to be no. There are no plans to reprint it, and I've never seen a copy in the second-hand market. But there are copies of Please Mister available on eBay, on Amazon, and on our own Facebook page, which is called The Greyhound and the Hare. so that anyone who would like to buy a copy of Please Mister, they're there, ready to come to you.
Tell us a little bit. I'm going to put you on the spot here, and give us one little sneak preview of a particular greyhound or a particular coursing enthusiast that you think you'll be telling a story or two about.
Gosh, there's so many, aren't there? There's so many. I think the people I remember most are the people who got the meeting going again, because I'd been to the Waterloo Cup in the 1970s, and in the fallow years between 1977 and 1981, when the Waterloo Cup was not run, I was going to Altcar at that time, and I could see how far things had declined, how far things had fallen. And then we got to 1981. It was so exciting when the Cup was revived. It's the people I remember who put the Cup back on the field, if I can put it that way. It's probably unfair to pick on certain names, but my closest friends who were involved in that were Sir Mark Prescott, who was very much a leading figure, a great Irish friend of mine called Fenton Kerman, who's sadly no longer with us, and perhaps kind of forgotten man was a man called Bill Stedman. And Bill was actually chairman of the National Coursing Club at the time and chairman of the Waterloo Cup Committee. He was a very tall, very quiet Welsh solicitor, as you are not a solicitor, a Welsh accountant. And Bill just had a way of getting things done, very quietly. He was, I think, the most diplomatic man that I've ever met. And perhaps because he was so self-effacing, because he was such a sort of quiet, reserved person, he tends to get forgotten, but he shouldn't be, because he was absolutely key in getting the thing up and running. And tragically, he was killed in a car accident in 1999. And I do miss him terribly.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that was the thing. You had these great kind of personalities that played off each other. You got the force of nature that is Sir Mark Prescott, who typically doesn't take no for an answer on things, and then you've got this quiet guy that Mr. Stedman, working just tirelessly to get all the thousands of details that no doubt needed to be attended to get the Waterloo Cup up and running again. It must have been a Herculean effort.
He was the best man I've ever seen at saying thank you in the world. He was a past master at saying thank you. And there aren't actually too many people like that. He never forgot anyone, and he never forgot a favor, and he never forgot to be truly grateful to the people who allowed things to happen. He was a great man.
Was he the primary liaison with Lord Leverhulme and his family?
Well, he would have been, yes, because Bill lived in North Wales, so he wasn't too far away, and he came from a long-established coursing family. His uncle had won the Waterloo Cup with a dog called My Sid Michael, and he was right at the centre of the National Coursing Club, of the Waterloo Cup Committee, and he's the man who made the machine tick.
What was it about Lord Leverhulme's background that gave him the impetus to, kind of return the estate to the purposes that Lord Sefton had put it to?
Well, I think he was just good-hearted. He had an enormous appreciation of the importance of the tradition of things. The family fortune comes from the huge global corporation known as Unilever, and which started out, I suppose, making most of their profits from making soap, powder, and margarine. But the Lever brothers. But he bought, because the house didn't go with it. It was just a sporting estate. So he bought it for the shooting, and then gave permission for the Waterloo Cup Committee to do everything that was required to bring the estate back to the point where we could hold a Waterloo Cup meeting. We got keepers on side, very important, and he was just wonderful. And I can remember him coming out onto the field once at Waterloo Cup, during the actual running, because in those days I used to stand out just in front of the crowd so I could take the results. And they brought Lord Leverhulme out onto the field from the nominators' enclosure to see the coursing close up. And of course, on the other side of the running ground, as you will remember, there was what's known laughingly as the public bank, which was covered with thousands and thousands of people, of course, watching the coursing. And the Lord Leverhulme, he peered rather short-sightedly into the distance. He said, "Who are all those people over there? I know who they are. They're the lads who come and poach my pheasants." Yeah, and he was just about right too.
I can remember when he was being driven into the nominators area. We were. It was the coursing had already gotten underway, and everybody was parked, and yet all these people were it was like the parting of the Red Sea. Make way for Lord Leverhulme. And I said, "Who's Lord Leverhulme?" I had no clue about this background at that point. They said, "Well, he's the landowner." I said, so he must be given the deference that he's due. That's for sure.
Well, there you are, see, John. In a feudal country like England, even Americans have to bow and scrape.
That's right.
At least
I think he was the first British lord I'd ever seen as well. So that was an occasion. No history of the Waterloo Cup. The last 22 of them would be complete without I'm sure a brief retelling of the American Invader, the only American greyhound ever to run in the Waterloo Cup, and ran in the last one. So no doubt you'll be devoting a few paragraphs to Cashel's Evening.
I will, of course. Evie was her nickname, wasn't it?
Yes.
Evie. Yes. And if I need any information, of course, I'm sure you're going to jog my memory for me.
I'll try. I've got some photos to send you, and I've told you, I've kiddingly said, well, you must devote, of course, an entire paragraph to the contingent of American greyhound enthusiasts who came over in groups there starting in about 98. Although I'm not sure about that. Did you have other American invaders in the form of spectators prior to that?
I don't think so. I'm trying to think. The interest, of course, the huge interest is from Ireland, as you would appreciate. But Europeans who are interested in greyhound racing, greyhound coursing, they came. The people who are keenest on coursing in Europe at large are, from time to time, the Portuguese, but also the Spanish. The Spanish love coursing, and as far as I know, in fact, I'm absolutely sure, there's coursing going on in Spain even as you and I speak now. And that's open coursing too, and just about as open as you can get. I can remember seeing film of a Spanish coursing meeting near Valladolid, and huge great fields, and all walked up coursing, no beaters or anything smart like that. And these courses going on over this cultivated ground forever and ever, and about 20 people riding after the courses on horses so they could keep up with the course. And every now and again, of course, the old hare would come back the other way, and there's the cavalry coming up behind. And as far as I could see, the lads who couldn't get hold of the horse were shinning up a neighboring electric pylon, with several thousand volts running through it. They climbed that so they could see better. It was great stuff. But no, because the Spanish, to a large extent, don't use purebred greyhounds.
More of the galgos.
Yeah, they use galgos, yes. Yes, but great sport, I should think.
Yeah, yeah.
And we had some Spanish runners. I think we had a Spanish runner at the same time that Evie ran.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think there was a Spanish runner that year.
Well, we're going to look forward to having the book come out. We're going to definitely have you back a few times to report on the progress of the book.
Thank you.
And then we'll figure out a way to cover. There'll be a launch, I assume, just as there was with the Greyhound and the Hare.
Well, we hope so. Yes, we'll get it written first. That's
right.
That's job number one.
Maybe we can figure out by then a way to cover it live here on Greyhound Nation, and who knows, maybe travel will be such at that point that we can. That'd be a great excuse for us to come back over. I can tell you that.
Yes, well, as the Irish would say, please God.
Exactly. Charlie, thanks again for coming on and giving us this great exclusive. Good luck on the book. You won't need it because you write so wonderfully, and your research skills are such that it's going to be another great chronicler of the history of the breed.
Well, thank you for inviting me, John. It's been great.
Folks, that's it for now. Be sure to keep posted to the Greyhound Nation podcast, and we'll be reporting further on the book that Charlie will be writing, 22 Waterloo Cups. And then in the meantime, check out Please Mr. and get those copies while you can, because when they're gone too. So we'll see you next time on the next episode of Greyhound Nation.
Thanks so much for listening to the show. If you're not a regular listener, be sure to follow Greyhound Nation wherever you get your podcasts. We're also on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Just search for Grey Nation Show, follow us, and you'll get notifications every time we release a new episode. If you like the episode, leave us a review on our Facebook page or your favorite podcast app. You can also send us feedback or questions via the contact form on our website at greyhoundnation.dog. That's greyhoundnation.dog. This episode was produced in collaboration with host John Parker. Our theme music was composed and performed by Dimitri Taras. Special thanks to our guest, Charlie Blanning. If you'd like to purchase one of Charlie's books or buy his new book when it becomes available, then check out our show notes to learn how to follow Charlie's writing on Facebook. Finally, this was Charlie's 5th appearance on the Greyhound Nation podcast. Charlie, your 5-timer smoking jacket is in the mail. I'm Michael Burns, and you've been listening to Greyhound Nation.